you questioning your reality? Do you feel gaslighted? It's not you. It's the media. I am Suchitra Vajayan, and I'll be joined by Bhakti Sringarpure and Madhuri Shastri to eviscerate the propaganda, set the record straight, and offer much-needed moral clarity. Tune in each week. It's not you, it's the media, a podcast by the Polis Project.
Hi Madhuri, hi Suchitra, welcome back everybody to It's Not You, It's the Media, our podcast dissecting, unpacking, unmasking and generally ranting about how bad the mainstream liberal media is. And today we are asking a very intense question and a difficult question, something we've all been grappling with and something that has had a short history, one that has changed the world. And the episode, we're calling it, and it's a question, is your social media activism working? And we don't have an answer, and maybe we'll arrive at something by the end of this particular session. But this is a tough question because, as you know, social media activism sort of, kicked off with Arab Spring, or as I like to say, the African Spring, because it was Tunisia and Egypt. But the Arab Spring kicked it off with the protests in Tahrir. All kinds of stuff happened. Everybody got on Twitter. There was all this organizing, all this solidarity building, so much energy. Soon we realized the importance of social media in getting these revolutions going and moving. Of course, at the same time, surveillance was always there. Those same revolutionaries, same protesters was also picked up, tortured, jailed. So there were very intense consequences to social media activism. And then over time, we got more used to the idea. And I think we also entered a phase of what we called slacktivism and hashtag activism. And I think for a long time that particular lull has remained, and we've all sort of rolled our eyes. We've done our social media activism, but we've rolled our eyes and known that it's not enough. But then with the events of Palestine in the last 15 months, everything changed because, liberal mainstream media showed just how invested they were in promoting the Israeli and the American version of the story. And we all came to rely so heavily on Instagram and TikTok in particular to get actual news from the ground. And you know that all these Palestinian journalists, many of whom have, of course, been killed since then, started these accounts and, gave us live stream footage of what was going on the ground. And we came to rely on that so much. Of course, we've entered the new year with all kinds of horrible debacles because the people who own these social media platforms are all a bunch of assholes. And these are disgusting men, absolutely right-wing, racist, fascist. I don't know if there's a word, just put it in the box and it will stick. They are all that. So, I don't know. Suchitra, I'm going to turn to you because you've been following a bit of this fiasco, all these things brewing in the last few weeks with Mark Zuckerberg denying, deciding to do away with fact-checking, aligning openly with Trump. He was always there, but more openly, Elon Musk, and Twitter is such a mess as well. And TikTok legislations have made that a distant possibility as well.
Yeah, Bhakti, I've been thinking about this and I just realized that we have two adult-looking men who are for all purposes boys, and if not for their whiteness and access to resources and capacity to extract money, would be incels in a basement somewhere playing a shitty video game. So let's kind of be very clear about that. And also let's understand that Facebook started as Mark Zuckerberg stealing an idea, or maybe that's still alleged stealing of an idea, but really a site meant to rate the women that he was going to school with at Harvard. Like basically this was a site created as a basis to rate other human beings on the scale of hotness. And now that Zuckerberg has a perm and a gold chain and has lost some weight and is wearing like t-shirts that he thinks fits him well, he thinks he can do and say whatever he wants. Having said that, what we're really seeing right now is that two of the richest men in the world now also own pretty much all of America's social media. Instagram, Meta, Twitter, and now in the last 18 months, what we've seen is with Palestine and TikTok really becoming the platform for pro-Palestinian conversations, there is an aligning of multiple interests. One, you see an oligarchy created, or an oligarchy wanting to have absolute control of American information and how people interact with information. Second, you have the APAC that has consistently created a system in which TikTok is either done away with or bought over, ideally, by two of these men. And what we're really seeing is how the American public that has actually benefited from an app like TikTok is now fighting back or trying to fight back in ways. What we've also seen is a mass migration. Americans are saying that, listen, like there's actually a TikTok where someone says, I will drop kick and drop ship my data to the Chinese. So what we've seen is a mass migration to an actual app called the Red Notebook. The app is called the Red Notebook.
And you are the official spokesman for the app? They hired you?
Not yet.
Okay, because this is all I've been getting in my text messages. Madhuri, are you part of these texts where Suchitra promotes this app?
And she's only worked on it, and I've only heard of it through her so far.
So all I'm saying is this has been the highest downloaded app in America. Americans are mass migrating to, we're seeing two trends. One, Americans are seeing this as an act of protest, which means that they're mass migrating to an app that is still 75% Mandarin. They're calling themselves TikTok refugees, and they are absolutely fascinated by the Chinese social media platform. And it's an interesting cultural phenomenon where they're realizing that there are conversations about Luigi Mangione, there are conversations about healthcare, there's like thirst traps being dropped left, right, and center. But what you're really seeing is the early euphoria of people understanding what collective action is, and this is not collective action that you and I know from the years after 9/11, where going to a protest was collective action. Now, mass migrating and following how the Facebook stock dips is how they're thinking.
Sure.
The other thing that you're seeing is also people going after Zuckerberg, and you're really seeing people trying to understand the idea of class consciousness. They are like talking about what does it mean for Americans to really think about it. The other thing is you're seeing podcasts like the Joe Rogan podcast and many other podcasts. Even with Trump, there is a left and right consensus about Israel and how Israel is going to be. Trump did a Twitter, he does these things on Truth Social where he puts out these polls where he says, what is the greatest threat to America? It's interesting because often over 66% is other, and the comment section in all of these polls name Israel as the biggest threat to America. So Trump is also kind of using social media in a very Truth Social in a very interesting way, and he leaves these open. He shared another video of Jeffrey Sachs calling Netanyahu the reason why America is in debt. So a lot is happening on social media. A lot of information is being shared. And I think there's also now the American elite are realizing that the TikTok sale might not happen. And given that Americans are mass migrating to this new app that is actually owned by the Communist Party or in China, that now we have legislations that are being proposed that might actually stop everything for the next 270 days. So that's my cliff notes of everything that is happening in the social media world.
Okay, very good. And I'm going to round us back. I mean, Madhuri, you should, of course, have your riff too. And I know that you are the most allergic to social media out of the three of us. So I want you to tell us. And as the youngest out of the three of us, we must take your opinion super seriously.
I think it was just absolutely bizarre for me to hear Suchitra recap what the function of social media was when it started. I mean, from, a rating people app or getting interested in people's lives, being a fly on the wall, we have gone to Meta basically controlling the entirety of our communications, like they own WhatsApp. Right? So they just have grandfathered us into this insanely, weird and dystopian system of communications, commerce, soapbox. I don't even know what social media is anymore. But if you look at like Instagram, it began I don't know, as a photo sharing app, but it's basically like a commerce website. It's kind of like Amazon, because everyone you have is selling something on Instagram. And then Twitter, I mean, honestly, trying to clean out social media or, trying to eliminate certain forms of social media, to me, is like trying to take pee out of a pool. Like, it's never going to happen. Social media is here to stay. What people have happily been grandfathered into whatever form it ends up taking. So no one is going to leave. The question for me is just observing how we have changed the way that we use social media. So, it's always like Twitter has always been notoriously, or what is now X, the site where people have used it to organize, meet here, meet at this time. This is where it's happening. It's all live updates, and it was such a galvanizing force. But it has been completely co-opted, and the amount of misinformation that is now spreading on it, fake news, alternative facts, whatever it is just really making it makes the whole enterprise, or using the whole enterprise, really risky. There's a risk that's coming with it, where you can't really trust your sources. And then now they have this like AI source verification. Like, is this true? Is this not true? So it feels like we're living in a very dystopian environment where like anybody can say anything. And to round it back to your fact checking situation, that's what really stresses me out, because sure, we migrated from let's share information about the news and about where to meet up to I don't even know if what is coming out is information, and there is no way for me to check whether this is fact or not. That has made it really, really dystopian. And obviously, the other thing about social media is it does give you the illusion, especially when you use it to spark outrage or respond to a social event or whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. So not only do I feel like it is sort of a conscience cleaning move, in the sense that it is important to do, but ultimately, if it's not translating into material change, then what is it really doing is the question. It's really doing more for you than it is for the cause, so to speak. And I'm not really speaking about Palestine. I'm just saying in general, like, you remember we've spoken about when all of these businesses and Michelle Obama and everyone had like black squares for the BLM, saying they're all taking time off to listen. And what did any of them do to change anything? Absolutely nothing. Like, DEI has been gutted. There were so many black squares, and where are we with DEI now? So it doesn't really translate into any actual change. And that, I think, is the problem with using social media simply to respond.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think I'm with you mostly regarding the translate into change. Debatable, or rather, it's unclear, right? I don't know. But I think one way in which we can track back to the question we are trying to get at today, and that's foremost in many people's minds, is your social media activism working? And some of it is working, some of it is not. That can be one sort of vague answer we can give. But let's talk about, like, what is activism, first of all? We are all in activistic circles 100%, whether it's through culture work, whether it's through actual organizing, whether it's through various coalitions. We are all part of something or the other and have a particular vantage point. And I guess the question to ask is, today we are in 2025. What does activism really mean? Where is social media within that? Of course, in my own life, I've seen it change from it meaning only marching down the streets, making amazing posters, shouting loudly. When I came to the US, that was the first time I learned about, writing letters to your local senators or whatever, councillors, and all this kind of stuff. And then, of course, as very much an adult, when social media took off, and it was such an exciting, extraordinary way to get people together. And one of the things is that it was one of the fastest ways one could fundraise. At that time you had organizations like Avaz, you had change.org, all these places where you could put your own petition up and you could fundraise, and then you had crowdfunding, and that was very exciting for a while. But then it became like you could fundraise for anything, anyone, whatever.
Exactly.
Everything became diluted, and it was very amorphous and a strange landscape,
This is, to me, yes, it was one of the most incredible feelings to feel like you could raise money and actualize change as an individual. And I've seen so many fundraisers for Gaza, and, I know that they're absolutely essential. For Gaza specifically, in the Polis project in our culture section, we ran an interview with a mural artist, Emmeline Blake, in Ireland, and they are one of the, they have a huge social media presence and have used that social media presence to raise money for Gaza. And in the interview, they talk about how difficult it is to actually get the money across and how much things cost. And the whole time I read it, I was like, this is kind of amazing that someone is doing this. But internally, I was so angry. What is the role of the state? Why is what the state should be doing falling on individual shoulders? And is the fact that that individuals are just taking matters into their own hands, and then it sort of becomes like a lottery. Who gets access to the money? Who's fundraising? There's nothing reliable. There is nothing like that has the rigor and the thoughtfulness of policy behind it. Everything feels like a lottery. I also follow this very extremely rich TikToker. Okay, she's like a big phenomenon. Her name is Meilang and she just like talks about how much she spends in a month, and she spends absurd amounts. Like she lives in New York, and she spends something like, she'll be like, I spent $18,000 on clubbing and going out. I went to Hermes. I spent $6,000, blah, blah, blah. And for September, not bad. My total is like $22,000. That's not bad. And people are very, like, oh, may this kind of luxury find me. In the comments, they say blah, blah. But then also she did this random giveaway where they just like gave money away to her followers, her and her brother. And I was just thinking, like, there are people waiting for the lottery. They are waiting for individual largesse. It is absolving the state of any responsibility. This could be such a good jump off into talking about universal basic income and blah, 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 blah. Totally. And yet here you are leering, lusting, whatever it is, after rich people, hoping that their largesse will fall upon you, hoping that they are going to be able to do you a fundraiser, hoping. And the shift away from state responsibility to individual responsibility that is galvanized by social media really upsets me and makes me feel some kind of way.
Absolutely.
But that's also what neoliberalist capitalistic system does. It outsources structural, systemic, state failure to individual responsibility. Right. Oh my God, we will do nothing about climate change, but why don't you recycle? Like, I'm not saying, I guess people are recycling, but recycling at an individual scale is never going to counter or even, it could be one of the many things. I do want to go back to Bhakti's question, and I think there's this one essay that I read on Scroll. It is an opinion piece by, I think this professor called Ishtikhar Ali. He says how performative outrage on social media is hampering Indian Muslims. And he really says his thesis is that this endless amplification of distressing posts create a narrative of suffering that is demoralizing. And real activism requires more than just creating awareness. I think this is something we forget, that a lot of well-meaning young people come to social media and do this because they are seeing their communities. It could be communities, this could be African-American communities in the United States, this could be in India, this could be Pakistan, this could be almost anywhere in the world. You are seeing a generation of young people from historically oppressed, marginalized communities who have lived through the brunt of the years of global war on terror.
Right.
Now, learning the language, coming on social media and understanding that their ideas, their eloquence has power. But I think what it also does is that this should be accompanied by a sense of institutional learning of what activism is. Activism sometimes is not calling out, sometimes it's calling people in. It is about the immense amount of energy required to organize. And there's a story that my grandfather told me many years ago when he was still alive. My grandfather was a communist. He lived in the south of India, in Tamil Nadu, and he would say that when they were young, this was still and this was not independent India, this was British India. So a lot of these young communists would go from village to village explaining mostly landless laborers about what does it mean for us to think about collective action.
Sure.
And usually this would be word of mouth. Somebody would know that they are coming. Sometimes they would arrive in a village at 6 in the evening and they would have just one person who's turned up to learn. And they would still bring out everything. Everything, the energy, the enthusiasm, the conversation, and make even that one person who turns up as they are the universe, and have those conversations built, and then next day get up in the morning and go to the next village. And he was like, this was foundational to build a kind of solidarity, because that one guy who turned up for you will always remember that you still gave him the time. And the fact that people forget that time is political. When I give you my time, it's political. I don't have to. And people forget that. And I think that institutional learning has not been passed on, which means what you have are incredibly hyper-aware, eloquent, young people who are articulate. They know their history. They can be absolute advocates for their community without actually having conversations with their community. And that is something, I'm sure there are exceptions, but this has become something that we do have to think about, because we are not giving them the wisdom, the institutional learning, the difficulty of sitting and working with people that you don't like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, social media, generally we think of it as bringing together, but it also fragments, which is what you're reminding us of. It fragments deeply, it dilutes, and it really in the end gets embedded within a constant materiality and consumption, and buy this and do this and fund that and do that. And that's where the confusion starts to come. Of course, I will have this perspective, and then I will suddenly be like, my God, I better give some money to this one or that one, because at this point there is nothing, right? This is what's happening in Gaza. The money is incredibly hard to get across, whatever those lines are. They are being deprived of everything from diapers to blankets to whatever, In fact, every time there is access to things like flour or food, there have been massacres. It's so bad that you're like, okay, what is there? I will give whatever I can. I don't want to sit and question this stuff, right? I will say that systemically, to have the state be so absent and to have neoliberal individualism as this charitable humanitarian, it's like, it's from my paycheck and here it is for you, to take that role. Of course, it's eroding all our social structures, but when you have a crisis like Sudan, like Gaza, you really see how horrible it is, this decentralization, this hyper-individualism, this reliance on ads and stuff like that, boosted algorithms, boosted kind of fundraisers, because they can afford to buy up certain algorithms and so on. It's really, really painful. And the second thing I want to add, just to put on the table, and I think it's not necessarily a clear agreement on what I'm about to say, but one of the things that happens is when you're trying to fundraise, if you're thinking of fundraising as one aspect of social media activism, the other aspect is, of course, policy changes, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But while we're talking about fundraising, the thing that happens is horrible pornographic imagery of suffering. Day in, day out, to see photos of those babies or those children or bodies mangled in the rubble, or these women who are survivors of rape in Sudan. I mean, I don't know who it's mobilizing. This is not social media activism. This is what I want to really and truly say. This is pornographic. It's not working. And people that I even absolutely respect, I think Motaz Aziz did a brilliant job of documenting the first many months, but he was always sharing images that were absolutely horrific. As a rule, to me, this is the biggest fallout, the use of suffering images, pornographic images, to do your social media activism. It kills me.
No, I think we've also created this sense of performing your trauma. Yeah. The performance of trauma has become the single most codified, entrenched aspect of our social media lives. And I was very, very taken aback when we had the confirmation of the Supreme Court justice, and then this was a justice who had a very severe allegation of sexual assault.
Brett Kavanaugh.
Kavanaugh's case, and then leading up to his victim, who was perfect, she was a perfect victim, right? She was eloquent, educated, white, just spoke so well. Like the idea that, somehow Anita Hill wasn't but she was. And leading up to her appearance in the hearing, what you really saw was women across social media so traumatized by the idea of a man with a known history of sexual violence becoming the Supreme Court justice, started telling the world their trauma. They said, listen, this is not an isolated incident. This happened to me.
My God, that thing was horrific.
Horrific. And I just kept seeing, and then I was like, why do we have to perform our trauma in order for us to be taken seriously? And finally, there was this one incredibly painful video of this woman who interrupts the senator who was interviewing, was supposed to question this woman, and said, this happened to me, do not confirm him, do not. And it was one of the most powerful moments where you're seeing that her body is physically shaking as she wants to be strong. At the same time, anger is just, and nothing happened. And another thing I've realized that even I have subconsciously started doing, which now I have to unlearn, is I started seeing people say things like, as the son of an Holocaust survivor, as a child of, and then when Palestine happened, I said, as a grandchild of a formerly colonized, and then I was like, I don't have to be a grandchild of a formerly colonized in order for me to stand with Palestine. Yes, I understand the solidarities, but that history is history. And we have done this thing as if, when they say, as a mother of Jewish children, as a child of, why? And social media has entrenched this thing where you have to profess your trauma, footnote all of your historical injustice, perform a certain kind of victimhood in order for you to say the most banal, reasonable stuff. And I think that is something that is going to take us years to unlearn and rethink.
Yeah, that's an identity politics trick kind of overlaying. It's really
it's a terrible union.
I know.
Yeah.
All kinds of.
No, I think social media is like ripe for it, right? It's waiting. And then, there was one thing I was thinking about that I wanted to say when first you were talking about fundraising. I don't think it should again be upon the person who's like making one single paycheck to fundraise. Like, I think if you are a millionaire or a billionaire, it is on you to shut up and open your wallet. Like, shut your mouth and open your wallet. Period. You open your wallet. I don't want to hear what you have to say. Just you throw money at the problem. There are things that are fixed if you throw money at the problem. Most of when I say policy change is exactly that, right? Throw money at the problem. The problem will go away. These are all fixable problems. Hunger is solvable. Climate change is controllable. War doesn't have to happen. Like, just shut your mouth and open your wallet. That's one thing that I will say to the uber wealthy who actually have the material ability to effect change. The other thing I wanted to say about activism, when I was thinking about, what is the function of activism? One of the things is to build solidarities among communities. That's one. And the other is to effect material change. The problem is that the algorithms, I think, inhibit that, because you get sucked into your own echo chamber of outrage and guilting and shaming, and you feel so utterly horrible about yourself. And so when people are posting these traumatizing pornographic events, you will yourself to watch it because you feel so guilty, and it's not really doing anything except you are punishing yourself because you feel guilty about something. And it's neither building solidarity, because you are in that echo chamber already, so everyone is probably posting images about Gaza and pro-Palestine anyway, at least for me. Neither is it building solidarity, nor is it effecting change, because you are just traumatizing yourself. And the flip side about performing your trauma is there might be, you might feel completely safe to share your trauma publicly, but what if there are people who don't want to listen? Maybe it makes me feel unsafe. There is also considering the person who is receiving it, like maybe, I don't know, like I often think about parents who might have lost their own children who see such images in Gaza. And I think like it's traumatizing to me. I don't know that a person, like I'm ready to just open my phone and see an image of like hands coming out of the rubble, So there's a lot of entitlement in being like, I don't mean this about Gaza, but with people sharing their individual trauma in order to build solidarity or effect change, that I feel like has a whiff of entitlement to it rather than solidarity building. And to me, when these social media has really blurred these lines, and I've engaged in it, okay? I have been a trauma sharer, oversharer, done things that I thought came from benevolent places of like building solidarity and building community, but really was my entitlement to share my story or see myself in social media. And so I speak from hopefully having moved forward from that, but social media really blurs these lines, and it really allows you to say, what I'm doing is not ethical, but it's activism. What I'm doing is not really great, but it's solidarity building, whatever it is,
Yeah.
So that's really a big issue with me of what social media has actually done in terms of diluting the effectiveness and the meaning of activism and change and solidarity. What do these words mean on social media?
Sure. And I think to move from the fundraising convert to the idea that activism should reach that government official or whatever, the person in power, so they can enact change. You have all these things like somebody doing hunger strikes and all those kinds of ways in which to build momentum to shift a policy or to get a prisoner, off death row. Famously, if you remember Kim Kardashian using one tweet to get that guy off death row, things like those magical moments that social media can give you. I think for me, a huge issue with social media activism is the immediate sense of catharsis. It's like, I learned something, I did something. I learned something about a situation in the world, whatever, and I did something. What did I do? I shared it. And if I am lucky enough to have lots of followers, I've really, really shared it. I have amplified it. So, and the catharsis is very quick, and the release of energy is very, very quick. And then in cases of Palestine and stuff like that, it's like maybe you're spending even more time, maybe you even gave a little. So this cycle is not working, right? I have said this many times. I want instant shift. We want instant shift. We want an end to this, and that's not going to happen. But yeah, I think the social media easy catharsis is the biggest problem for me. And this idea that we are radicalized by social media. I've learned so much. Here you go through 6 slides and you learn the entire history of like indigeneity and all this, and it's like, what? What is happening? Or you've summarized a whole book in 10 slides on Instagram. It's like, no, this kills me as a professor, but also just like, this is not the same as reading a book.
I think one of the things that is changing, and I'm seeing the change, is that there is a shift to in-person organizing. I think Palestine has shown us that. I remember when I first moved to New York, my first pro-Palestinian protest had like 5 or 6 people. And cut back to now, I'm seeing young people protesting every single week and almost 2 or 3 times a week on the street for a year. This is one of the longest sustained protests that we've known, and they're not just protesting, they're getting together each week, they're having conversations, they are building a momentum. And I think for the first time, I think you're seeing some parity between where the social media allows and helps for people to connect with each other.
Right.
And once that connection happens, you're seeing them meet in real life. And of course, every time I go to these organizing meetings, my first fear is, oh my God, like who's the cop or the thing? But that just
remember when someone thought I was that mole?
What? Oh my God. Okay, we have to say this. There was a protest that I had organized in which Madhuri had come. And Madhuri just had this like really fabulous new haircut. I think it was more blonde. And I'm
like all FBI people, of course.
And then this person who's an activist who, again, and I understand this because there's so much, because our communities are surveilled, walks up to me and says, Suchitra, I want to say something to you. I said, what happened? I think there might be a mole. I said, what? And they said, you see that woman there? Like, no one has seen her. Like, I'm sure, this, either it's the Indian embassy, it's maybe the FBI, it's it is the NYPD counter. I was like, who? And they were pointing to Madhuri. And then I had to be like, no, it is someone that I know. And then for a minute I was like, does this person know something about Madhuri that I don't know?
So now I'll always remain suspicious.
I just give off big cop energy. What can I say?
Yeah.
activism or organizing or mobilizing and registering your discontent, it has to have a spectacle, right? Like there's a spectacle element to it, like a 1 million strong march, or, anytime we think of people protesting, like from, the 60s to now in the US, whatever it is, it's always about strength in numbers. And even your social media, which gives you that false feeling of strength in numbers, has to be matched by that spectacle of in-person activism, in-person showing. Like, it is not a substitute for getting out there and showing yourself and doing the work. And as Suchitra, you have pointed out in the past, as taking the material hits, like that's what solidarity is about. If you are performing your politics, you are bearing the consequences. You are facing the consequences. And we had this conversation when we spoke about book prizes and how writers have been interacting with the Zionist publishing ecosystem and whether they're really, putting their money where their mouth is, so to speak.
I just want to say that don't perform by donating $50 and then hiding it off and then performing it as if don't do this Ocasio-Cortez bullshit where you go to the Met Gala with a dress that says "Eat the Rich." Don't go to a shitty fundraiser or some gala organized by Zionists and have something say "Stop the war." Stop what war? And then somehow
the
war, and then somehow expect some kind of praise for the most banal piece of existence.
Exactly. The only real function, can I say, that I think social media plays that I find meaningful is to create a repository of counter narratives, right? So remember in 2003 and 2001, like how many times have you heard liberals say, if only we knew we would never invade, bomb, kill, we just didn't know. And now you cannot say that. There is no way for you to say that you didn't know. There is some way for you to find it. You have to just go online and it is there. Even if you are in an echo chamber, something will make its way. So that, I think, has been the really good thing about all of this stuff. Like, we've been calling it, everybody calls this genocide a live stream genocide. I mean, what kind of horrible distinction is that to have, At the same time, it is a live stream genocide. So don't you dare say you didn't know. In the face of all this, misreporting, misinformation, the last thing that you can plead is ignorance. And so to that effect, I think social media has been enormously successful, and it is always there as an archive. And the unmasking of the liberals and the complete wresting of that last excuse from their arms, I will forever be grateful to social media for performing that function.
I just want to say that social media has been incredibly important to me for the work that I do, and specifically for building Polis Project, because in early 2016 or 17, I maybe had no more than 500 or 700 followers, and I'd never used Twitter. It's only when I wanted to build Polis Project, no legacy, no money, no resources, it's not print, I was not an editor, social media became this amplifying soapbox for me. While people within my own very little niche knew who I was, nobody knew anything else about me. And I think social media kind of really helped me amplify, refine, reach people. I also understand that era of social media is gone, but I would be, and today again I feel it's like a full circle where from having 600 followers I built it up to 90,000 over a course of 5 years or 6 years, and now there is no reach. But I do think that era of having that 5 or 6 years, where people that I would have otherwise never known who I am, what I am, knew who I was, what my work was, and of course helped build a new institution that I would otherwise not. If I was doing Polis Project today, and I'm sure the same thing with Bhakti's Warscapes or Radical Books, it would be a very different thing, and those are conversations we're having now. But during that years, social media was, and otherwise I don't see so many of those connections, relationships, access to. I also felt people, and I have to mention this because I could not have built Polis Project in India or countries like India where social connection and network is the single most, and your caste location and your access to whether you're part of the literary culture or if you're part of the elite defines if you can do something. In the United States, as somebody who had no access to these networks over a period of 5 to 7 years, I was able to build that, and social media was a big part of that. And I don't want to ever take away what social media did to me, and of course the communities around me.
Yeah, that era is totally over. And I just want to remind you, Suchitra, I know you like to thank Twitter and all that, but I want to remind you of the time when you raised a bunch of cash to travel around the borders of India on Facebook, okay? And I had already met you in person, and my power was more on Facebook, and I still keep my Facebook because I compiled an entire anthology of Sudanese fiction because it was all via Facebook, you know. Folks were banned, PDFs were being shared, you know, and all those people still remain. It's like losing a phone book if I lose Facebook right now. And primarily, I will say, you know, African, Global South folks that still, you know, that are not really on Twitter or Insta, but they still remain on Facebook, and it's just to chat or whatever Mark Zuckerberg does. It's still a communication tool that I can't yet give up because I'll just lose a whole bunch of contacts. But I want to come around to the importance of what you're saying, which is the importance of culture work. So we're talking about fundraising, we're talking about activism as eliciting change from government officials, from policy makers and so on. But also because this is something I know and I understand very well, I want to emphasize cultural activism or culture work, whatever you want to call it. It's super, super important. I mean, culture, the hegemony, the world we live in, what we watch, what visuals we take in, when we do it unanalytically, we are completely lost. And culture work is deeply important to make you stop watching the crap you watch or to tear apart nonsense that comes out at the Golden Globes or the Oscars or whatever mainstream imperial culture. And that becomes really important. What is a Zionist narrative? What is an imperial narrative? What is a white gaze? What is a colonial gaze? These are questions that are still relevant that we can do. And who publishes whom? Where does the money flow? That's all tied up in culture. And I think all those things have to come together for any form of activism. And we can probably end on a note by saying, you know, how do we do social media activism and how can we do it well?
I don't think there is a way to do social media activism well. I think, as I said, as long as it functions as a repository of a counter-narrative, I think that to me is doing it well.
Okay.
But I agree with your point, Bhakti, about cultural production and cultural activism, because we all know that a shift in culture is what precedes the shift in political ideology. So you have to have a willing populace that's worked on, you know, for decades and decades and decades before you actually have a government, a conservative or a fascist government come. There's loads of writing about it, including on the Polis Project, that talks about the cultural molding in order to create these fascist governments. So yes, I agree with you. And to the extent that we can disseminate cultural information and keep those thoughts alive and create a discourse on those and make them more accessible to people, not distilled, not defanged, but truly accessible to people, like free PDFs, whatever it is. I'm all for social media being used in that way.
I think for me, I'm going to maybe take a very different view, is that I don't think the kind of activism that I've done in the last few years has been the most effective, and I think that's a very honest grounding of it. It made me feel depleted. It made me realize that we were chasing such low, targets with such exhausting human effort, and instead now I actually tell people not to call me an activist anymore, because I also never saw myself as an activist. I was always very shocked when people would call me that. At the end of the day, I am a writer. That's who I am. Everything else is a way to do this writing. I'm a writer, and I'm someone who loves this public stuff, this engagement. This is all I am, and this is all I want to do, and I love to do. This is where my superpower lies, or whatever superpower that I think I have lies here. Which means for me now, it really is building institutions that can support this. That means building Polis Project. That means Festival of Ideas. It means the Freedom House. I know all of this it's a lifetime's work. But I think the capacity to understand and articulate culture and have a say in how it is molded and doing it collectively like the way we are doing now is where I see, for me, that is a far more powerful way forward. And I want to say that I have changed my mind about this over and over again. And I want to preface it by saying that I remember doing refugee legal aid work, and I realized that individual lawyers struggling for 16 hours a day in Cairo, trying to help 800 Iraqi families with no help, with a broken printer, is not the most effective use of my time. I understood that when I was 26. And now, almost 15 years later, I am telling myself that building institutions is the single most important thing that we can do, and doing it and then passing that knowledge on to others and doing it collectively perhaps is where I see my role as. But this doesn't mean that I'm taking away the role of other activists on the ground, but I'm just seeing where I fit in within the multiple puzzles that exist.
So, yeah, I think these are all very interesting things to think about. I think what I'm getting, from you, Suchitra, primarily is ask yourself, what really is your talent? Where is it that you can make a contribution? What can you do? You may be able to do very little, but that may count, or you may be able to do a lot, and that may count too. And I really believe that it's a synthesis of many, many, many things that have to come together for activism to work, for things to happen at a cultural level, political level, psychological, societal level, economic level, boycotts, marches, everything needs to harmonize for some shift to happen, But also we can say subscribe, like, share, follow, post this one, retweet this one. I'm just kidding. Thanks very much. And I think it was a good conversation for me to work through a lot of stuff personally, and I hope it was helpful at least to some who've been grappling with this question. Thanks so much.